Hello everyone. So we're ready to start our next session. How might we fund the future? My name is Sarah Slade. I'm Executive Director of Commercial and Operations at ACME, and I'm really delighted to be moderating this session looking at the very gnarly issue of how might we fund the future. And all of those of you who've been here for the last day and a half will not have missed the point that every session has mentioned about how we need more people, we need different skills, we need more money, we need more models, we need more ways of looking at how we're going to address this gnarly issue. But first, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and the waterways of Greater Melbourne, the people of the Kulin Nation, and recognise that ACME is located on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. I also pay my respects to elders both past and present and warmly acknowledge any elders who have joined us here today. We have three excellent panellists for this conversation, and one of them you will see, Malia, is joining us from San Francisco. So while they were setting all that up, I'm just going to do the introductions from here and then join them for the discussion. We'd really like you all to take part in this conversation. I know you've all been contributing via Slido, and there's been an opportunity for some of those questions to come up at the end. But for this, we want to do that from the beginning. There'll be a prompt question. Each of the panellists will give their answers to that question, and then we'll be jumping right into your questions. So please start asking them from the beginning. But first, let me introduce our panellists. We have Dr. Georgie McLean, who's sitting here. We have Malia Simons, who's on the screen from San Francisco. And we have John Wiley, AM, who's in the middle. So Dr. Georgie McLean is the Executive Director of Development and Partnerships at Creative Australia. She oversees sector engagement, research and professional development and digital culture strategies. She looks for opportunities to extend the public value of the cultural and creative industries with new partners in new ways. Prior to joining Creative Australia, Georgie has been a media arts leader who has researched and shaped creative industries, dynamics, programs and policy for 20 years. With an applied research doctorate of cultural research, a Masters of Arts in Communication, an MBA underway, and strong practical knowledge of the screen, arts and media industries, Georgie translates between ideas, research and practice. She has served on several boards, including Diversity Arts Australia and the advisory boards of Queensland University of Technology's Digital Media Research Centre and Western Sydney University's Institute for Culture and Society. Joining her is Malia Simons. Malia manages corporate philanthropy for the Americas at Bloomberg Philanthropies. She oversees a portfolio that includes engagement programs for employees and clients, collaborations with non-profit partners, and corporate giving across the United States, Canada, and Latin America. John Wiley is principal and founder of alternative asset investment firm Tanara, which manages $3.5 billion of funds investing in global venture capital, private equity, private credit and PE-style strategies in listed companies. Tanara's investors include many of Australia's largest superannuation funds, family offices and high net worth investors. John has 35 years' experience in investment and finance in Australia, the US and the UK. He is the former President of State Library Victoria, Chair of the Australian Sports Commission and the Melbourne Cricket Ground Trust. He is an trustee emeritus of the Rhodes Trust Scholarships based at Oxford University, having previously served as a trustee. John and his wife Miriam are very active in the philanthropic space through their foundation, which invests in a wide range of community organisations in education, Indigenous programs, social inclusion, sport and wellbeing, and various community interests. They also fund a pro bono strategic and financial advisory service for charities called Tanara Philanthropic Advisors. And John is also Companion of the Order of Australia. So I'll move over after I've started this prompt question, but I'd like to start the conversation with a prompt question to you all. And that is, over the last day and a half, we've heard about a range of challenges and opportunities. And one thing is clear: to make the most of these opportunities and manage the challenges, existing funding models won't all work and new approaches are needed. What do you think should be considered? And Georgie, if you'd like to start. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And I'd also like to add my acknowledgements to the custodians of this place, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. So we get the very challenging task of finding solutions to the many challenges that have been posited over the last couple of days. And I also just want to say to Seb and his team at ACME what a stimulating couple of days it's been. It's been really fantastic to hear such great ideas and really kind of extraordinary thinking about this space. Of course, I'm here representing Creative Australia, the investment, development and advocacy body for Australian arts and culture, and recognising Carolyn on our board and many of our other colleagues here in the room. So we will always, of course, make the case for government funding. We see it as really central to the ability to continue to do this work. And, you know, we have a new kind of policy context at the moment in Australia, which is really exciting. We're a year in to revive the National Cultural Policy. We at Creative Australia have 47 of the 85 actions in Revive, so it's quite a big remit. And part of that is an encouragement to think differently about models and about how government funding can work in partnership and work in new ways. We know that grants are really important, and you know, I think Mia yesterday said, if you find any money in the creative industries, grab it. You know, of course, it always will be a central part of the way we think about this work, but it's a tool and it's not an end game. And I think one of the things that we need to think about is how that tool can be used alongside other ways of thinking about support and new forms of capital and capability we can bring into the sector to help amplify the opportunity. Because we do know that there's always more ambition than there is available resources, and there's always need for support for new forms of practice and new areas that are being left out. And there's, you know, really very real challenges we've all been talking about. You know, there's no art on a dead planet, there's no anything on a dead planet. We all have really new wicked problems that we have to engage with. Also referencing the great work that was being discussed on the previous panel, there are very real challenges around equity that we all have to grapple with in this sector. And there's new needs for different models and ways of thinking. So I guess, you know, there's also been some really exciting discussion today about prototypes, and I want to reference some work that I've been reading recently in the renewable energies space by Saul Griffith, and he talks about, look, dystopias don't work, they're just self-defeating. Utopias are never achieved. We need prototopias, we need prototypes, we need new ways of thinking and new models of working which give us opportunities for systems change. And some of the things we've been doing at Creative Australia in thinking about these new models we've been charged with under the cultural policy are kind of piloting how we can show our relevance to other sectors and how we can really make sure that the arts are valued and of value to all Australians. And that is about really showing solidarity with other sectors and other ways of working in other domains. So that's around, you know, education, well-being. We've done a huge amount of work on mental health, and I acknowledge my colleagues in the research team for the incredible work they've done in the Connected Lives research and the progress there. And we've been piloting new ways of building capability in the creative sector to help to work really successfully in those domains. It's also about thinking about philanthropy and what we can do together, how there's this mutual intent. And, you know, we all know that the burden on the sector of going for individual opportunities and individual grants and really kind of trying to build something out of these small pockets of money, it's kind of incumbent on us to start thinking about how we work together for bigger, more scalable change. And, you know, we're taking some inspiration from some new innovations around the things like the investment dialogue for Australian children that have seen philanthropy really kind of work very closely with one another to say, in 10 years, how can we kind of make a radical systems change to equity in this country, and how can we bring government with us? So it's a round table of, you know, philanthropic organisations with mutual intent, bringing together departments like, you know, social services and health and education to really think about what's needed for a big system sort of level change. And my sense is we need something around that, like that, around culture. We need to start working together much more structurally and thinking about how we kind of support new forms of progress in that area. And of course that lovely sentiment today about radical experimentation, right? And how do we kind of find ways to think differently about some of the challenges we're facing? Because, you know, as Eric said yesterday, in all of this disruption, creativity continues to deliver meaning and it continues to deliver context, and it's where agency rises up. So those are all the things we're going to need more and more in this new kind of set of wicked problems we're facing, and it's something that we can only do together with really genuine collaboration.
Great, thank you very much. Very optimistic start, well done. So now we'll move to Malia, if you'd like to make your reflections on the question.
Yes, hi. Thank you everyone for having me. I just want to assure you I'm not an AI chatbot, although maybe you wish I was after this conversation. I think that the challenges are always seem insurmountable, but I think there are a couple ways of looking at this. And again, my experience is primarily from a US and North American and South American funder. But there's this sort of idea of general operations, which a lot of foundations and individuals are not interested in and corporations, because they want to have a specific project. They want to have a name to it. So I think one of the ways to think about this is, are there different pockets that arts organizations can reach out to sort of fundraise for, specific areas? And I think that in terms of organizational capacity, there's a cycle, which is what we've shared with a lot of arts nonprofits, that was developed by a man named Michael Kaiser. And it's about just doing what you do best. So whatever that is at your institution or your cultural organization, marketing that, because if people know what you do, you'll build this family around it. And the family are the people who you fundraise from. Those could be your community members who attend your programs. Those could be your donors, your board members. And you raise those funds and you reinvest in what it is you do best. So I think sometimes organizations, and again, there's been a lot of talk about technology and data and AI and what's new and how can we incorporate that. But I think we don't want to forget, like, what's the core value that your organization brings, and the reason why, and the community or audience that you serve, and the reason why a funder would want to support that. Just an example of a couple of things that we funded through Bloomberg Philanthropies. So in the US, we noticed that there were lots of organizations that don't get what we consider general operating support, which is a grant to do whatever makes sense for your organization. So we started a capacity building program where we gave that funding. And we heard from organizations that it was tremendously helpful. To this day, there aren't a lot of funders who give general operating support. So it didn't quite catch on with other funders, but it is something that we are definitely committed to. I think specifically in the technology space, for many of you who don't know what Bloomberg is, it is a data and technology company. We use technology to provide data, analytics, information, news to our customers who are primarily in the financial sector. So we have a founder, Mike Bloomberg, who basically considers himself running a 40-year-old startup. And so he's very interested in supporting entrepreneurs. And when we had the opportunity to support this new technology that would bring access to arts and culture to people, and it was called the Audio Guide, he jumped on the chance to support that, because this was going to be using data as a way to provide content to people who wouldn't normally have access to that, because you would only hear these stories if you had a curator-led tour, and we know how curators love to give those tours, not very frequently. So that sort of evolved. 10 years later, we had lots of organizations coming to us saying, oh, there's the smartphone, there are these apps, we want to have something that's different and unique to our organization. So again, we thought, oh, this is interesting. This is using technology, to again reach audiences where they are on their phones. And so we supported a lot of bespoke projects and a lot of things that ultimately didn't work out. But we were willing to kind of see that through because we believed in these organizations because, again, they were doing their work is at the height of where it should be, right? They're doing what they do best. And this was just a vehicle to kind of expand that and share that with other people and new audiences. But what we also recognized is that each bespoke project wasn't really speaking to everyone. And so we funded a second round of why don't we support everyone to just put their information onto one type of app so that it's easy to use, you know what you're doing. And that is what we have today, the Bloomberg Connects app, where we have hundreds of organizations around the world who are able to participate in it. Now, it's free. However, you have to have the time, the staff, and the content to be able to put on this. And as an organization, you have to keep it relevant. So just the last part of this is what we recently learned is that a lot of organizations don't have that staff or the resources for their back end or to scan all their images or to digitize their videos. So we now have a new program where we're supporting that sort of unsexy digital back end work that we're actually really excited about. So I think all that to say is that funders are interested in both supporting the well-being of the institution, but are also looking for opportunities to support things that really move the organization and that are in tune with the communities they serve or the audiences who come or the visitors, because ultimately that's what makes your institution, right, keep going, is that you're relevant and interesting to your community.
Malia, can I just say it's pretty lucky you're not here in person. I think there'd be a queue right out the door to talk to you.
It was a very strategic move. Not as strategic by John, though. Thanks, Malia. So, John, do you think new approaches are needed and what should we be considering?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Georgie and Malia, for those very interesting comments. What I thought I might start off today by doing is to talk about some economic issues as I see them, some political issues that are relevant to the arts and culture sectors, and some observations on philanthropy, given that my wife and I are very actively involved in the philanthropic space. I analyse economic structures of industries for my day job, and so that's sort of how I sort of tend to start on things. So if I fall asleep, I won't take it personally. But look, I'd say two things on the economics that are relevant to the arts and culture sectors. Firstly, I think we all know instinctively that the walls of different sectors are collapsing on each other, and technology disruption is bringing so many different spheres of life together, and the arts and culture sectors are no different in that respect. And what that means is that you have to recognise that you all are in the entertainment industry, and being in the entertainment industry, you are competing with everybody these days. You're competing with Netflix, you're competing with TikTok, you're competing with the English Premier League, and your customer base everyone's time poor, everyone's overloaded by information, by text message and WhatsApp messages coming in all hours of the day. And so people have very limited time to engage, and so it really makes it important that you have a very clear value proposition, and then you can cut through all that noise and really have a strong brand identity and culture and value proposition for what you stand for in this emerging world where everything's sort of competing with each other. The second element I'd say is that in so many industries, we have what I characterise as a winner takes all or winner takes most kind of set of economic outcomes. And there's no better example than that than the technology sector with these monster technology companies that we've got in North America, now the tech companies that ate the world, and you see it in the arts and culture sector. So I'm going to do a quick thought experiment for everybody. So hands up everybody here who's been inside the State Library in recent times, who has read a book or been to an exhibition at the State Library. That's actually better than I thought. I'm happy about that as former president of the library. How many people have got tickets to Taylor Swift in the next 72 hours?
No one can afford them.
We've got
Well, that's the reverse.
we've got a very specific audience here, John.
Never work live, okay? My point being this, that Taylor Swift is going to walk out of Australia with about $100 million in merchandise sales. Some people say it's $200 million, and probably about $120 million minimum of ticket sales. It's in 7 days. It's just phenomenal. And you see that in so many aspects of the arts and culture sector, that we're increasingly, just like in sectors of the business world, you have a winner-takes-all kind of phenomenon. And so we see a little bit here in Victoria with, the NGV is doing an amazing job, but the NGV really does, it is winning a very substantial share of the pie of public funding, if you like, as a credit to them, because they're doing a very, very good job. But you have to recognise that as smaller organisations, right, you don't have the same privileged position as larger organisations, and you've got to fight for relevance and fight for attention, and you shouldn't be shy about that. Second, on politics, I'd just say that recognise that it's not easy, right? Politics is so increasingly short term these days. Politicians, I know Martin Foley's here. This doesn't apply to you, Martin, but it was a fantastic minister for the arts. But politics is the grants from governments tend to be so anchored to the past. Plus or minus 2%. Is there going to be an efficiency dividend? It's really hard to get a breakout, particularly for operational funding, for capability building and things like that. And the truth is, the left side of politics looks at this sector and says, we love you, thank you very much, but you're going to vote for us anyway. And the other side of politics says, well, you're not going to vote for us, so we're not going to give you additional money. And it's being made worse by the culture wars going on in society. And so the political framework to get more money is getting increasingly challenging, and you have to recognise that, which means there's a greater emphasis on self-help. Then when it comes to the world of philanthropy, Miriam, my wife, and I do a lot across the arts and education and sport and a whole range of things. And I can tell you, in the education sector, they say, we wish we had the philanthropic money that goes into the sporting sector. And then in the sporting sector, they say, we wish we had the money that goes into the arts and culture sectors. We're so disadvantaged. And so all I'd say to you is, just don't look over your shoulder. Don't look at other sectors. Self-help is the best form of help. And if you come up with pitches that are incisive, that have cut through, that have a clear value proposition, you will win in the world of philanthropy, where there's such increased competition from other good causes like climate and health and fighting inequality in the world and all the consequences of inequality. So the last thing I'd say before we get into Q&A, Sarah, is what's the answer to all that? Well, the answer, I think, part of the answer is innovation and technology, and using technology as your friend. And it's kind of ironic for a finance and business guy to be sort of talking to creative types about being creative and innovative. But I've seen it firsthand. With the state library, we went to the government and both sides of politics before the 2014 election and said, you should give us money for this worthy project you should fund to redevelop the state library. And both of them looked at us and said, sorry, no money for you. And so we said, okay, we'll do something different. We'll do a 2-to-1 matching scheme, right? $2 from government for every $1 of philanthropic money we raised. We wound up raising $30 million of philanthropic funding. We got $60 million of pull-through money from government that we wouldn't have got otherwise. Fantastic outcome. We had an innovative financing model. We also found that when we're actually trying to get donors and supporters for individual projects within the library, that you change the game. So rather than having a room for these books and a room for that exhibition, we created a centre for entrepreneurship. We created a centre for digital media. All these things that didn't exist. And what I learned from that is that the number of compelling funding pitches you can come up with are really only limited by your imagination. You've got the world at your feet in terms of any cultural organisation, the value propositions you can put to people. It's happening here at ACME with the way that ACME has these skills and people hanging around it in creating fantastic video games, which are hugely relevant to the world of virtual reality and gaming that's overtaking the world. So, and look, you've seen Luma with what Bruce Peterson did with just taking art to the masses in a completely different way. So, be bold, embrace technology, take risks, and come up with incisive, innovative funding pitches, and you will succeed.
Wow, that went up, down, and back up again. At the end, well done, John. Well done.
Can I ask John a question?
Yeah, of course
Sarah?
you
That'd
can,
be very
Georgie.
cheeky.
Yeah.
Without notice. You may take it on notice if you like, John. No, I'm just really curious. So obviously what you were talking about at the end there is finding new forms of value, right? And I think that one thing that we have started to really think deeply about in the creative industries is how we define our value in new ways. And I think, I'd like to challenge you a little bit on this idea that we're an entertainment industry. I actually think we're in the engagement industry in the sense that we offer engagement on a whole range of levels, in a whole range of disciplines, and in an attention economy, that is magic dust, that is gold, right? And I feel that there's an opportunity for us to really think differently about value, and in an environment, in an economic environment in which people are starting to think about different forms of risk, and all of these wicked problems we've been engaging with over the last couple of days have created an environment for every organisation to think about that differently. I guess that sense of, generating value rather than being extractive, and really thinking about what we add to all the forms of capital, like the, intellectual property, and thinking about community and, connection, gives us a different relationship to social licence, which mitigates a lot of the risk. I mean, I think in your intro you mentioned I was halfway through an MBA when I started this role. I was doing it for my sins an accountancy course, which is not kind of my natural habitat, I must say, and defer to greater knowledge in the room. But one of the things that they were talking about is this idea that, intangible assets used to be worth about 16% of organisational value in the 70s. It's now closer to 80%. So all of the things that the people in this room create and do have become much more valuable. And we need to start thinking about that in different ways, because it is that relationship to community licence, to equity, to new ways of thinking about things, and to this kind of sense of engagement with purpose and brand and identity and ideas that give us an incredible story to tell that is sort of transcends technology in some ways, I would argue, anyway.
Great point. So what I would say to that is I think we're sort of in agreement on most things, but saying it in a different way. What you're doing and what Creative Australia is doing with creative partnerships is hugely important, and it's a expression of what I was trying to say, which is you have to make yourself, as a creative arts sector organisation, you need to make yourself relevant to whomever's going to give you funding, whether it's government, whether it's business, whether it's philanthropy or whatever. And so you need to have a clear, incisive value proposition. What's the value proposition? If you go along in a fashion where you're expecting to be pulled along and you're hoping someone's going to shower magic dust upon you, you're probably going to fail in this day and age, because there's 300 people outside the door who'll have a better pitch than you will, right? If you flip it on its head and say, we are going to pull government along, we're going to pull business along, we're going to make it in their interests, why they should support us, why they should partner with us, why it's good for their brand publicly, you'll succeed. And so, as an example, at the State Library, we had this dreadful efficiency dividend dragging us down every year. And the argument that we found that was hugely relevant that succeeded in unlocking government funding, additional organisational funding as opposed to building redevelopments, was the State Library. It's the centre of the knowledge economy. Well, here's Victoria. Australia, the world, has gone into the knowledge economy era, and Victoria's right at the heart of it. And that is the number one export industry in Victoria now. The State Library is the central servicing hub for the knowledge economy here in Victoria. And you go down there every day of the week, it's packed. It's a magic thing. It's the fourth most visited library in the world. It's amazing, right? And so you don't have a knowledge economy here in Victoria unless you support organisations like the State Library, and you invest in them and you give them the capability, because there's a multiplier effect. You say that and you change the conversation, as opposed to, oh, we've got an efficiency dividend, please give us more money. That's the point I was trying to make. I do absolutely believe that you are in the entertainment industry, and you shouldn't resile from that fact. Tony Elwood he's an absolute genius, that guy, and what he did with the Bonnard exhibition. You see it down there, everyone's taking selfies for Instagram. It was the Bonnard exhibition was designed for photo opportunities on Instagram and TikTok and all that sort of thing, and it worked, and that's how you get visitations. And don't be afraid of that. Don't be shy of it. Embrace it and use it.
Yeah, no, I think they're excellent points. I think that one of the things that's really interesting about that is that we're sort of like entertainment plus, because we're not short term It's got to extend over a long period of time. If you're thinking of institutions or organisations, a lot of them have legislations like ACME or the State Library of Victoria that don't let you change the core offer that you're providing. So that makes the value proposition even more important. And I think that it's interesting. I wonder what you think about the fact that every institution, even if we think just within Victoria, in some ways seems to be in competition with each other and trying to argue the same points to funders, to philanthropists, to government, to whoever's going to support them. And how can we break out of that mode of thinking?
Oh, me? Well, I guess one of the opportunities is to... So here, I have a nice kind of solution to this, potentially. So one of the things we are charged with under the National Cultural Policy is this thing called the State of Culture Report, which gives us, for the first time, a shared narrative of what successful culture might look like for Australia. It's modelled on the State of the Environment report that some of you will be familiar with in this room, that was designed several years ago to start telling the story of ecosystems, and looks at kind of species loss and kind of some of the kind of pretty dystopian facts, but also where there's good progress. So I guess what that opportunity provides, and acknowledging Rebecca Mostyn in the room, who is charged with that in the research team and working very closely across with our partners at Screen Australia and others across the creative industries to help tell this story, is drawing on a range of data sets to kind of give a sense of what a healthy Australian culture is and should look like. And I guess what it provides for the first time is a set of common points of reference around what we all agree Australian culture is and should be, right, or could be. So individual arts organisations should be able to use those data points and that reference point and that sense of impact measurement to evaluate their own progress and say, this is where we contribute. And it's kind of using a shared lens. So it won't entirely take away the competition between others to make that case, but at least it gives you a shared language around what that is. And you can say, I contribute that pixel in the picture, and I can show how I do that. Because I think at the moment there's a lot of frustration around people who go, look, anecdotally, we know we do all this for community, we know we do this, we have we've got all this wonderful data about the people who walk through the door, but they can't tell the story in a way that's necessarily going to resonate, as John was saying, with the people they're talking to. And we hope that in developing this work, and the first iteration of this report is due in 2026 and will inform the next iteration of the National Cultural Policy, it will help us all tell that story in a way that is much more kind of coherent.
I think that's really helpful, because I think the danger is that certainly from institutions, don't worry, we're going to move away from institutions-only conversations in a minute, and we're going to go to the Slido questions. But I think that the problem is that within institutions, when you look at them, everyone is trying to do the same range of things. They're not clear enough about their value proposition, and they're not comfortable with stating this is how we are different from everyone else, and they're not comfortable with giving something up if someone else is doing it better. But I don't know what you think about that, John.
A couple of things. So I've lived the dream where you do get this mindset in the sector that there's like this sort of Hunger Games, that a dollar that goes to that institution is a dollar less that I'm going to get, and it's a mindset that we have to overcome, and so the organisations need to work together for the common good, and I applaud what Creative Australia is doing in trying to grow the whole pie. One of the things that we do in the world of philanthropy, we say if you come to us and you're just interested in growing your own organisation in a market share battle with other people, we're not going to give you any support. If you are trying to grow your organisation but at the same time trying to grow the pie for everybody, we'll support you. That's a good thing to do. And so people need to think about growing the whole pie and working together. And I really do believe that there's an old line from the management consulting firm McKinsey, what are you famous for? And people, when they look at Melbourne, they look at Melbourne and Victoria. And what's Melbourne and Victoria famous for? We're famous for a great education sector, we're famous for a great sporting culture, but we're also famous for great arts and culture. And of all the Australian cities, this is the place, for the arts and culture hub. And yet we don't optimise that, we don't take advantage of it. A couple of weeks ago we had this amazing event down at Melbourne Park in the form of the Australian Open Tennis Tournament. 1 million people went there for the first time. And these are people who are going there, spending a lot of money, maybe not spending money on cultural institutions because of that. It was a fantastic event. Craig Tiley does an amazing job. on the Monday morning afterwards, the players have all gone, the caravan moves on, that place is empty, and it might have the occasional concert or whatever. Whereas the arts and culture sector, it is 52 weeks a year. It's year round. It's an amazing foundational base for Melbourne, and what goes with that is, if the organisations work together, particularly around sort of opportunities for events and things like that, better than I think we've done in the past. I think there's an opportunity to grow the pie for everybody and strengthen that base.
No, I think that's great. Okay, we're going to move now to away from institutional for a while. And the most popular question so far on Slido is, and I'll pass this to you, Malia, if that's okay. What would happen if institutional funding was redistributed to supply artists, community storytellers, cultural leaders with a living wage? Do you have any reflections on that, given what you're looking at in terms of what you fund?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge with sort of traditional funding organizations like foundations or corporations, is, at least in the US, is that we want to be giving to established, let's call them organizations that, you know, have a track record, have a tax exempt status that makes them, you know, charitable. But for them to then select the artists because they know better than we do, right? And to support those exhibitions or those performances or those individual artists in a way that, you know, makes sense. And we don't want to be sort of selecting the particular artists to support. So I think that's one kind of challenge. I do think that we've had a couple of partnerships with organizations that fund individual artists and try to support them in ways where they'll give them a grant. They can use that grant for whatever it is. I remember one artist sent us a thank you note and said, hey, I used that money to pay my taxes because I hadn't, you know, for a while. You know, so I think there's you know, such a range of how we could be helpful to artists, but sort of indirectly through organizations that are doing that work. You know, we also support organizations that provide technical assistance to artists, you know, again, provide with small grants or small loans for them to get the work done that they need to, you know. So I think that I wish there were more organizations that were doing more work to advocate for artists so that they could have a living wage, so they could, you know, make this work full time, because we would be happy to support them.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to the point that you made earlier and asked both Georgie and John. So it seems to be very rare that an organisation, a government, specifically apart from its sort of core funding, or philanthropists will give money for operational work that an organisation has to do or a not-for-profit has to do. How do you think that could change? Just drawing on Malia's comments at the beginning and what they've done in that area, and her comment that not many other places have followed that lead.
Yeah, look, I think there has been a shift. I mean, I remember going to the Philanthropy Australia conference several years ago, and there being real advocacy for funding operational capacity and really trusting organisations. And I think that is very much a narrative that's very live in philanthropy at the moment, to really think about how do we sort of fund people for success rather than fund a program or an individual kind of project. And I think that is shifting. I mean, obviously we do a lot of work in supporting multi-year, in trying to kind of ensure that we're embedding opportunities for organisations to be more sustainable. We just announced our multi-year funding in December, and we're able to fund 60 more organisations, which was a really great outcome of the National Cultural Policy, and having some additional resources to dedicate. I guess too, you know, a lot of the work is around thinking about organisational capability and the scaffolding you can put around it. And, you know, we're doing a lot of work in our in industry development team, thinking about how we can support organisational capability through, you know, scaffolding and supports and professional development and opportunities for, you know, digital strategists in residence, and thinking differently about what organisations actually need and those interventions. I mean, it is challenging to support every organisation because you have to pick which bricks and mortar you're going to support, but then there's also kind of, that need for sort of collaborative funding, and part of that is the new models. And, we're looking at things like impact investing that take you much more into that area, and that gives you much more organisational capability. It brings new forms of capital into the sector. It creates kind of, a social impact lens on all of that investment, which is really, really valuable. And it does create much more sustainable opportunity for organisations, for the right kinds of organisations, right? So we're looking for ways to grow that pie and to work in partnership and in genuine collaboration. Yeah.
Look, the only thing I'd add to that is we saw at the State Library that visitation doubled over the years, in part because we were providing a good community service, but also we had a lot of international students wanting to come and use the facilities, and yet our funding was just a fixed blob of dollars from the government. And so we looked at, with government, we looked at, can we change the model so we get a baseline funding and then we get a sort of variable component of funding that's tied to numbers coming through the door, to give us an incentive to increase visitation, to make ourselves more relevant. There's no sort of right or wrong answer for these things, but that does reward good outcomes. I'm going to say one thing that's surprising as a business and finance person, which is trying to reduce everything that the arts and culture sector does down to narrow KPIs for the next 12 months is not always a good idea. There's the old saying about what matters can't always be measured, and what can be measured doesn't always matter. And it is true, and you can drive sort of perverse behaviours and incentives by trying to reduce everything to KPIs in the very short term. But there are ways to think about different funding models that do incentivise good management, good leadership, and in particular, I come back to what we did with the capital funding program for the State Library, where we had this match funding thing, and governments love that, right? Because first of all, they know that the program, whatever you're doing, is supported by philanthropic or corporate dollars. And so it's not just being a worthy institution saying, we're a worthy institution, give us money. There's validation, if you like, from the government. And for philanthropists, it's a very attractive thing, because they know for every $1 they put in, there's another dollar coming from government or $2 coming from government. And so their financial investment gets leveraged in a big way. And so thinking about these sort of different financial models in innovative ways and taking a few risks and being willing to have that conversation with government is a good thing to do.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and it's the counter of that, which I don't know whether it's valid or not, but I know it comes across in one of the questions I'll read out in a minute, and I know it's something that within institutions is often felt, is if philanthropy steps up for the arts, does it just allow public funding to be reduced? So as you get more, particularly for operational funding, let's say, there's always the risk, there's always the feeling within an organisation that if you ask for that rather than something like a capital project that has a defined end, a defined amount of money that's needed, and then it's finished and you get value from it, if it's for something ongoing that normally would be publicly funded and you find an innovative way to get someone to fund that who's not government, is the risk that your government funding will reduce. How can you change that perception, or is that just life?
So I've lived that dream too. So the first thing, just be a bit of creative accounting never goes astray. Okay, so you can have programs that we're doing this particular thing with this particular philanthropic funding, and so it looks like it's ring fenced from anything that's in the normal operations of the institution. Just how you present things actually matters in these things. And secondly, in the world of sports administration, government funding has been exactly the same challenge with funding for Olympic sports and Paralympic sports, going sideways, in fact going down. Meantime, the AFL and the professional sports are just absolutely caning it. And so we made a serious effort in the 9 years I was chair of the board there to attract philanthropic funding, co-funding for the major sports. And some generous Australians like Gina Reinhardt and others stepped up and gave money, and they were laser focused on that issue. They said, we're not engaging in just financial substitution for the government and paying taxes by a different form. And so they actually wrote agreements, and they said, well, we will give you money that's conditional upon no reduction in government funding, and you can use that to go back to the government and say, well, we've attracted this donation, this philanthropic support, but it's conditional on you doing X. And so you can actually use that as smart leverage with government. We didn't actually try that with Martin Foley, if he's here. Maybe we should have.
Well, you've told him now, yeah, if he is here. George, did you have something
Oh,
to
look,
say?
just to concur, we know that philanthropy don't like just to fill gaps in government funding, and we know that that's a real kind of turn-off for a lot of those partnerships. But I guess, and we've got match funding programs ourselves that have come to us through creative partnerships and have done that for some time. I guess one of the things I would say too is that, finding ways to think about evaluating where money's going and what it's doing and how it's kind of increasing sustainability or building opportunity or, really clear impact measurement is a really key part of this, and we have a very strong focus on that, and it's a new kind of growing and kind of increasing focus of Creative Australia. But I guess too, really, there's this whole review around the double giving agenda. So Productivity Commission has been running this review on how it can inquire into philanthropy at the moment. And it's interesting, some of the conversations around that are quite interesting, because there was a discussion that said, look, the arts is the only sector in which you can really overtly say government is only going to be able to fund this much, and we need philanthropy for the rest. You couldn't go out publicly and say that about health. You couldn't go out and say that publicly about kind of welfare, right? Even though some of those partnerships are really critical to delivering those outcomes. But in the arts, there's always been this sense that we have to do it together. And, Venice is a perfect example of that. So the pavilion wouldn't happen without philanthropy, the Australian presence at Venice. But it is seen as a site in which those sorts of partnerships are really recognised, because they're with a population of our scale and the challenges we've got with that, there's absolutely no way we could realise the ambition we do without those sorts of private-public partnerships. And I think I think people do understand that, and I think it's about a sophisticated approach to ensuring that it isn't just a stopgap, and again, having those conversations with government about what the potential is.
No, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating observation as well. Malia, what about in the United States? Do you see this as an issue that operational funding or institutions or organisations being concerned about going and getting external funding for what they would regard as maybe core operations, that it might reduce the government's ability to pay for those things? I think it's very different in America.
Yeah, it is. Government doesn't provide a lot of funding. I feel like the government funding agencies would welcome you going to another organization or corporate or philanthropist or your community. That's just a different challenge that we have here, and that's just a given. And I think that's why there is this kind of culture of philanthropy and individual giving and people supporting cultural institutions, whether they have $50 or $50 million. So I do think it's interesting, that it has to be either or. I feel like when I worked for a brief time in New York City, kind of funding arts organizations, we were really thrilled to see that organizations had other sources of funding. But again, I guess that's sort of the history of government funding in the US. And so that made us feel like, great, we should continue to give you the same support because you've actually gone out and gotten more from other people.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Another great question here, not our final question, but we're getting close to the end. If you could design, and this is Australia's arts funding, so Malia, you can answer it from any perspective you like, but if you could design Australia's arts funding structure from scratch, what would be different to what we have today, and what would we need to keep the same? So we'll start maybe with John.
Thanks, Sarah.
I saw the look of panic on everyone else's face, John.
I was involved with the State Library. What would I do? Look, I think the structure, the overall structure, is actually not bad. Okay, I don't agree with the idea of defunding the organisations. If you defund the organisations, you sort of cut the system off from the top, from the head. And aspiring artists, they need these. We've got fantastic cultural organisations in Australia, and we need them. They've got a really, really important role to play. I would encourage the cultural institutions to, again, think about themselves in the context of an entertainment market, to think about how they embrace technology in smart ways to make their product more accessible, more appealing, more innovative, different. One of the things I'd love to see You know, I go along occasionally to the Melbourne Recital Centre and you see these concerts and they're wonderful and they have amazing performers. And you think, why is it when you go to the Melbourne Cricket Ground and you watch a game of sport, they've got the spider cam that drops down and it goes 1 inch away from the player, and yet when you go, the format of traditional performance art has not changed for 100 years in so many ways. You're still sitting 80 metres away looking at and applauding politely as someone who you actually can't see exactly close up what they're doing. So the arts and culture sector has fallen behind other sectors in the use of technology. And the last thing I'd say is that with boards of the cultural institutions, I don't think that the boards of cultural institutions, there should be sort of a pay-to-play kind of mentality that you have to be wealthy, you have to be prepared to give in order to be on the board. I think that is actually the wrong mentality. You don't want to have boards of rich people, okay? But
some rich people are nice.
You're worse than me, Sarah. You don't want that, but you need to think smart. The boards of organisations and management teams of organisations need to think smart about how you get the capabilities. You know, you look for the capabilities in and around you in terms of all the skill sets in the organisation, in terms of the artistic capabilities of people around you. You need to be equally focused on getting the skill sets around you to be able to engage with government effectively, raise money, and just be shameless about that. And it doesn't mean those people have to be on the board. You can have all sorts of, again, it comes down to just being innovative, how you do things. You can have friends of the XYZ organisation. You can have advisory boards. You can have patrons, semi-patrons, whatever. Make it up, you know, just make up your story as you go along, but get lots and lots of fellow travellers and friends around you, and you'll be a long way down the path to success.
Thanks, John. Malia, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, knowing absolutely nothing about how.
As I say, you can talk about any government you like.
Fantastic. I guess, I do think that government should provide more funding for arts and culture, whether that's through some way, through tax incentives. Like in San Francisco, there was pre-COVID this tax. So taxes that were gleaned from hotel stays went into a pot and then funded arts and culture organizations, because people go to these cities for arts and culture. And you said it earlier. I mean, I was in Sydney in December and they said, oh, if you want arts and culture, you should go to Melbourne. So government.
Quite right.
Right? I know. They're like, you're fine here to go to the beach, but if you want to go to a museum, you got to go to Melbourne. But so government should be supporting that. This is a vehicle for tourism, and it's known that people come there. So why can't they support that? I was just going to add that I think corporations should give more to arts and culture, because that's where they operate. Those are places where they have their employees and their clients and their people who are involved with their business, wherever they are. And I think that organizations should think about, as you were saying, multi-levels of giving. There's something to be said for this sort of very low membership, the grassroots people who just love that programming and come, to the organization. That's a real community that could be giving more.
Fantastic. Don't know anything about Australia, and there were really very useful comments. Thank you, Malia. Really helpful, especially the one about go to Melbourne. That was good to hear. Georgie?
Yeah, look, I guess one of the things I would like to see is a co-responsibility for arts and culture across all parts of government, so that, we get investment from health for all of our health benefits. We get investments from education for all of our benefits to education, because we know, all of us know, what value there is there. And I think that, the vicissitudes of funding, like our CFO at Executive Director of Corporate Resources at Creative Australia has this PowerPoint he shows of our funding over time, and it is the most unedifying story, right? We are so precarious always, even in the funding agency, let alone working in a small to medium arts organisation or being an independent artist. It just goes within the tides, right? So if we can actually get this sort of sense of why it's valuable, it's a massive employer, 3 times mining. Like, it is a huge industry and it is a growing industry. Like, games is growing in double digits. Like, all of these parts of the sector are absolutely where we need to kind of go to back ourselves, as you said, as a knowledge nation, right, a knowledge economy. And I think to have that kind of recognised would be really, really significant. I guess too, you know, as a board last year we had a strategy day, didn't we, Caroline? And we actually, to quote Taylor Swift, we started going, well, hello, it's me, I'm the problem, it's me, right? Like, part of the effect of having an agency like us is conservatising, because it does tie people to a certain model of thinking about it. And Wesley Enoch, our Deputy Chair, was challenging us to think about what life was like before Australia Council funding 50 years ago, and there was lots of dynamism and different forms of exchange that were both commercial but public, and, you know, really thinking differently about it. And I guess, you know, if we can think about, I came from screen into this sort of world, and in screen you are used to thinking about working in partnership in different ways because you need it to finance things, right? You're not just kind of treating yourself the world like the Vatican, bestowing favours, right? You actually have to really work as one lever in a much bigger ecosystem and think about who you can partner with and how you can collaborate. And, you know, Seb was talking yesterday about the opportunities that COVID seemed to show us of that form of collaboration and how we haven't yet been able to grasp that and realise that. And I think that's because, you know, under pressure we all retreat into what, you know, that trying to kind of save the furniture and make things happen. But I would love to see arts and culture and creativity embedded in the way we think about what kind of world we want to live in. And, you know, there's an opportunity. Like Treasury was talking about measuring what matters. Well, you know, this matters. And, you know, our data shows us our National Arts Participation Survey that came out at the very end of last year showed us that, you know, 97% of Australians are engaging with arts and culture, 84% of it see the positive benefits of arts and culture. More than ever, we're attending arts events because we know what it does for our mental health and our well-being. Like, we're seeing all these benefits. The audiences know it. The public knows it. Why can't we fund it in those terms?
Yeah. And I think, as John said earlier, it's about being razor sharp on value and the value you provide to community and to society. And I don't think as a sector, as individual organisations or institutions, that we're very good at that. And I think we shy away from trying to promote the value and what we create, whether it's in economic terms, whether it's in impacts, whatever it is. I think it's something that doesn't come naturally to us. The final question that I'm going to ask, which was directed, Georgie, to do with Creative Australia, but I think it's good to get everyone's reflections on, is should there be funding for more commercial or operational training for people who are working in these areas? So would it be something that, would commercial funding training be something that Creative Australia would look at?
What do you mean by commercial training?
So training in how you maximise getting commercial funding in.
Absolutely.
Training in how you understand how to put in bids for philanthropists. Training in how you can sort of think of different models of how you assess value or impact.
Yep. So we already do a huge amount of capacity building around fundraising, and we've, you know, got this fantastic team that we've inherited from Creative Partnerships Australia, and also that we've recruited since then to really help build sector capability in having those conversations and making the value case to philanthropy and to think about that. We also do a lot of work in our industry development team, and Adam McGowan, our Director of Industry Development, is in the room as well, and we're really focusing on business innovation and creative entrepreneurship and how we can support organisations to build their financial capability. There's these brilliant governance resources that have just been developed by Adam's team to help organisations all really kind of build that capability, and we've been doing a lot of work with Diversity Arts Australia on how to make that more equitable and kind of, you know, relevant to community. So I think, you know, a lot of the work around building capability has also got to think about the wide range of ways that our work is relevant, and a lot of that is, you know, artists are great at making art, not so great at talking to money, not so great at admin, and there's some really kind of interesting models. Well, you know, that's a rash generalisation. Some are brilliant, producers are brilliant at admin, right? But that sense of, you know, small to medium arts organisations have the same kind of compliance and administrative burdens as massive kind of really well-funded organisations with huge teams. So it's very uneven in terms of the pressures that they face. So I'm really interested in models like, there's this great model that emerged in Belgium around a cooperative model to support artists to work in those ways and to really take some of those pressures off arts organisations. Could we think about those for Australia? You know, there's some really interesting things that we can do to help think about, not necessarily government having all the ideas here, but what can what could be sector led in providing solutions to these problems.
Yeah. Malia, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do think that, yes, absolutely, providing training for people to improve the outcomes for fundraising is absolutely key. One thing that we tried is actually to pair up kind of experienced fundraisers who are at larger institutions with newer kind of fundraisers at smaller institutions, just because at that time that seemed like that was a way to provide a sort of mentor-mentee relationship that would kind of supplement formal training, and it seemed to work, in that experiment, and I do think that also creates this community of collaboration, and there was actually 2 organizations that ended up deciding to merge because they realized they were kind of fundraising for the same thing, and they were doing the same programming. So I think also setting up arenas or areas or platforms where people can collaborate on this fundraising is key as well.
No, that's a great idea. Now, we have run out of time. I've got a couple of housekeeping things, but John, did you have anything final you want to say about that?
Just very briefly, look, investing in skills development is one of the most important things that you can do, and it's the long-term multiplier effect. I think the words "the government should" be banned, okay, because it's the 3 favourite words of a lot of people in Australian business. Miriam and I, through our foundation, we actually invest in a program for skills development for Indigenous administrators through the Melbourne Theatre Company. It's fantastic. We love it. Gives them opportunities and skills that they wouldn't have otherwise. And Miriam's about to chair this French Australian Cultural Foundation that's going to do the same thing for creating opportunities for administrators in Australia to go and work over in France and build skills and build a global perspective and build relationships they wouldn't have otherwise. Once you get underneath the big glamour exhibitions, investing in that skills development is just such an important thing to do. So we love it, and thanks for asking the question.
No, it's a pleasure. And thank you all. I think everyone, I certainly have found it really illuminating. A lot of very practical things for people to think about and question the approaches that we currently have. So let's thank John, Malia and Georgie.